I never imagined I'd discover the kind of life my husband had been hiding from me. Not in a dramatic way, not in a weird intuition or a gut feeling. I mean a full-on, undeniable, proof-in-your-face reality. It started innocently enough, or at least that's how I remember it. I was browsing through Zillow late one night, just casually scrolling because I couldn't sleep, and I stumbled across a house listed under his name. At first, I thought it was one of those bank errors or maybe a friend using his account to look at homes. But the address, I didn't recognize it. And the photos. God, the photos made my stomach twist. It was beautiful, suburban perfect. Freshly painted cream siding, manicured lawn, a porch with a swing, two-story windows reflecting the early morning sun. My hands shook as I clicked through the listing, heart hammering, because the paperwork clearly said it was his. I knew my husband, Chris, had a successful job in real estate consulting, but this wasn't a small investment property in the city. It was a full-on family home, and it had his name all over it. My brain raced, trying to come up with excuses. Maybe it was a client's house he had to temporarily take ownership of. Maybe he was planning a secret vacation home for us. I wanted, desperately, to make it something innocent. But then I saw the bedroom set up, and the kitchen, and the living room staged like it was meant for daily life, not for selling. There were children's toys scattered across the floor in one photo. Children. My hands went cold. I dropped the phone onto the bed beside me and pressed my hands to my face, shaking. I had no clue where to even start. Chris and I had been married almost 9 years. We had a perfectly normal life, or what I thought was normal. Our little house in the suburbs of Charlotte, the weekend trips to the mountains, our dinners out on Friday nights, the cozy nights in with wine and Netflix. I thought I knew everything about him, every quirk, every embarrassing story, every corner of his past. And now there was this other life, a life with children I had never met, in a house I had never seen, and the reality of it hit me like a punch to the chest. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining what could be behind that perfect cream siding. Who were these kids? Was he married to someone else? How could he keep the secret? The thoughts were relentless, like tiny needles in my brain, each one sharper than the last. By morning, I couldn't contain it anymore. I had to confront him, but the thought of how, exactly, made me nauseous. My hands trembled as I tried to act normal during breakfast. He sat across from me, sipping his coffee like nothing had changed, scrolling through emails on his phone. His casualness felt like betrayal in its purest form. "Chris, we need to talk," I finally said, my voice tight. He looked up, calm, expectant. "Sure, what's up?" I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand everything at once, but instead I pushed down the hysteria, trying to find some coherent words. I found something last night. On Zillow. It's a house. Your name's on it. There are things in it. Kids, Chris. Children. Who are they?" He froze, mid-sip. His face shifted from mild surprise to something colder, almost rehearsed. "Oh, that." He set the mug down carefully, like it was fragile. "That? Chris, you're telling me there's a house in your name I've never heard about with children in it, and that's just that?" My voice rose. I could feel the tears building, the tightness in my throat. "I don't understand. How could you hide this from me?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. His eyes didn't meet mine, and for the first time, I noticed the fatigue there, like he'd been carrying this for years, and finally, he didn't have to hide it anymore. "I wanted to tell you," he said, almost quietly. "I really did, but I didn't know how, and I wasn't ready." I laughed, bitter and shaky, because every nerve in my body was screaming that this wasn't about readiness. Not ready. Chris, we're married. We share everything. You have kids somewhere I don't know about, and you've been living this double life, and somehow I'm supposed to nod and say, "Okay, tell me when you're ready?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "It's complicated. I never wanted it to be like this. I didn't plan it. None of it. I was young. I made mistakes." Mistakes? I felt like the room was spinning. Mistakes didn't come with second families. Mistakes didn't have mortgages, bedrooms, school projects, birthday parties. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to disappear. "You've been living with another family? Chris, do you even hear yourself? Do you know what you've done?" He nodded slowly. "I know, and I'm sorry. More than you can imagine. I never thought it would come to this. I thought I could manage it. I thought I could
I don't know, make it work without hurting you. And there it was, the lie in plain sight. He thought he could make it work. Make it work. Like I was a footnote. Like my life, my trust, my love were all secondary to some secret he kept tucked away in a perfectly staged house across town. The anger that welled up in me was primal. I wanted to hit him, to scream, to tear the walls down. But more than anything, I wanted to disappear from a world where this kind of betrayal was possible. I didn't sleep that night either, but for a different reason. I sat on the edge of our bed, knees pressed to my chest, staring at the wall. I kept replaying every moment of our life together, trying to pinpoint the signs I'd missed. The late nights he spent at work, the calls he said were from clients but were always hushed when I walked in the room, the weekend trips he took with vague excuses. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the subtle clues, the whispers of a life I never knew existed? Over the next few days, I watched him closely. Every glance, every word, every hesitation told me more than he could ever say aloud. I learned about a woman named Laura, who I guess was his partner in this other life, although he never called her that to me. They had 2 kids, twins, 6 years old, a boy and a girl. I didn't know their names at first, and every detail he offered felt like a jagged knife in my chest. He explained it all like a confessional, each revelation like a weight being thrown on my chest. He was careful, precise, apologetic, like the more detail he gave, the better I could somehow forgive him. But I couldn't. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't eat. I couldn't make sense of a man who lived 2 parallel lives while expecting me to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I started retracing every moment I had of our married life, and suddenly, memories that had felt mundane, even comforting, took on a new, sinister tone. The vacations we took, the ones where he had business meetings, the late nights at the office, each one suddenly had a hidden meaning. Every smile, every tender word suddenly felt like a mask, a deception layered over a reality I couldn't accept. One night, I drove past the neighborhood where this house supposedly was. I didn't stop. I didn't want to confront him physically or emotionally just yet. I just needed to see it. The streets were quiet, perfectly lined with trees shedding the last of winter leaves. The house sat there like a monument to everything I had never known.
From a distance, it looked normal, welcoming, the kind of home you'd imagine raising kids in. And it was exactly that, the normalcy of it. The fact that he had managed to create an entirely separate life that looked so ordinary, so American, so comfortable, while I had been oblivious, it made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't describe. I started questioning everything. My sanity, his sanity, our marriage. Was any of it real? Were the years of shared memories, of whispered confessions at night, of love letters tucked into my purse, all fabricated? Or was it just that he had compartmentalized, kept 2 realities running in parallel, and somehow in his mind I wasn't supposed to know? I confronted him again, more aggressively this time. I demanded to know why, when, and how he had started this other life. He explained that Laura was someone he had known in college, a mistake that turned into something bigger, something real in its own right. He claimed he loved both of us, though the words felt hollow to my ears. I asked him how he could love 2 families and still live under the same roof with me. He looked at me with a mixture of shame and desperation. I don't know, he admitted. I thought I could keep it separate. I thought you'd never find out. The thought of him thinking he could manage 2 families, 2 lives, 2 truths without them colliding, without me discovering him, it was unbearable. My mind was a whirlwind of rage, grief, and disbelief. I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt erased, like the person I had been for 9 years didn't even exist in his world. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat felt raw, my voice broken from earlier confrontations, my soul shattered from realizing the full scope of what he'd done. I spent days sitting in silence, replaying his words, analyzing his every expression, trying to find the truth buried beneath the guilt he wore like armor. I even considered confronting Laura, though I didn't know what I would say or how I could justify that intrusion. The thought of seeing her, of seeing the children, terrified me, but also made my blood boil. How could someone live openly as a mother while I had been kept in the dark? How could someone exist in his life so fully while I had been fed a steady diet of half-truths? Sleep became impossible. I would lie awake, staring at our ceiling, imagining what their lives looked like. Were they happy? Did they call him Daddy, trust him, love him without suspicion? And yet, even as I hated them for existing in this secret world,
I hated him more for creating it, for orchestrating this deception with such precision, for living a life where the truth could be hidden behind walls of suburban normalcy. By the end of the week, I felt like I was living inside a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Everything in my life had been touched by this revelation. The home I had considered our sanctuary suddenly felt like a cage. Our shared friends, our routines, even our dog, everything felt tainted by the knowledge of the other family. I realized with a sinking, crushing certainty that the life I thought I had was a lie, and the man I had married, the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, he was someone I didn't know at all. I remember the first time I saw him with them. It wasn't planned. I hadn't even thought I'd actually do it, but one afternoon, curiosity overpowered the panic. I drove past the house again, this time closer, slow enough to see movement inside through the living room windows. There he was, Chris, laughing, holding one of the twins upside down, spinning him around while the girl clutched his leg. Their little faces were glowing with joy, and for a second I felt like a stranger intruding on a private movie, a scene I wasn't meant to witness. My chest tightened so hard it felt like someone had squeezed it with bare hands. He looked happy. God, he looked completely at home. And I felt like I'd been erased from the script of my own life. I couldn't move at first. I just sat there in the car, parked across the street, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The rational part of me screamed to leave, to drive home, to pretend I hadn't seen a thing. But a darker, sharper part of me, the part that wanted answers, that wanted confrontation, that wanted to rip the truth out of him, kept me frozen. And then, of course, he looked up. I caught his eyes for a split second. He froze too, and in that moment, something passed between us. Panic, guilt, recognition. I don't know what it was exactly, but I know it made me slam the car door quietly and drive off before either of us could say anything. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because the reality had finally hit me visually. This wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't some Zillow listing I could dismiss as a mistake. This was real life. He had a second family, and now I had proof I couldn't unsee. I started noticing the patterns in our own home. Every time he went out to work late or to meet a client, I felt that same tightness in my chest. I couldn't eat properly. I couldn't focus on my own job. I became obsessed with figuring out the logistics, how often he saw them, where he went, how he balanced two families without collapsing. And the more I discovered, the worse it became. I found receipts, hints of credit card charges, vacation bookings that didn't match what he told me. Each one was a dagger, proving the meticulous nature of his deception. He noticed the shift in me. I could see it in his eyes, the guilt, the anxiety, the fear that I'd start asking the wrong questions, or worse, following him. One evening, I confronted him again, this time with a calculated calm I didn't feel. "I know where the house is," I said, my voice quieter than usual but sharp. "I know about the kids. I've seen them." He stiffened. "You, what?" His words were soft, almost disbelieving. "I've seen them. I know about Laura, the twins, everything. Don't lie to me." He ran a hand over his face. I didn't think you'd ever see them." "You didn't think I'd ever find out? Or you didn't think I'd survive seeing it?" I asked, voice trembling but steady. "Do you have any idea what it's like to live with someone you love for 9 years and realize they have an entire other life that you didn't know existed?" He went silent. I watched him carefully, and the silence screamed louder than any words. I wanted to hate him in that moment, but it was complicated. Part of me still loved him, or maybe I loved the memory of him, the man I thought he was. That made the betrayal feel sharper, more cutting, because it wasn't just the lies. It was the man I trusted, the life I believed in that had been a carefully constructed illusion. I began following the story in my mind like a thriller, retracing timelines, picking apart the moments when the second life intersected with ours. I realized the twins were born just a year after we got married. The timing made my head spin. How had I not noticed? How had he managed to build a family while maintaining our marriage without a single slip? It was insane, audacious even, and it made me feel complicit somehow in my own erasure. I started questioning myself. Was I too trusting, too naive, or was he just that good at hiding? The turning point came when I accidentally ran into Laura at a grocery store.
I didn't recognize her at first. She had the typical suburban mom look. Jeans, hoodie, messy bun, pushing a shopping cart with the twins strapped in the seats. We made eye contact in the produce aisle, and the world froze. She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge me, But there was this flicker, this recognition in her eyes that made my stomach drop. I walked away without saying a word, but the encounter haunted me. I realized that she existed in the same world I did, moving through it simultaneously, and I had no control over it. I started noticing the little things about Chris that I had ignored for years. How he always had an extra key in his wallet, how he kept certain emails on a separate device, how he had weekend routines that I never questioned before. Suddenly, everything clicked, and I understood the scale of the deception. This wasn't a fling or a brief affair. This was a parallel life, managed with the precision of a full-time job. And the more I understood, the more my anger boiled, mixed with a deep, almost paralyzing grief. One night, I finally demanded the full truth. We sat in the living room, lights dim, wine untouched on the coffee table. "Tell me everything," I said, voice low but insistent. "I want to hear it from start to finish. No lies, no half-truths. I need the timeline, the details, everything." He sighed, leaned back, and began. "It started before we even got married," he admitted, voice tight. "I met Laura in college, like I said. It was casual at first, but then it got complicated. When you and I got serious, I tried to end things, but she was pregnant. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to handle it. So I compartmentalized. I built a house for them, tried to be present for them, and somehow I convinced myself I could manage both lives. And for a long time, I thought I was doing it, right. I could feel my face burning, my chest tightening with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. Right? I repeated, incredulous. Right? Chris, you think building a secret life is the right thing? That raising two sets of people while lying to me for years is right? He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, exhausted, broken, trying to convey some version of regret with his eyes. "I thought I could make everyone happy," he whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing for all of them. I thought I could keep it all together." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to feel anything other than this nauseating mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. But mostly, I just wanted to understand. I wanted to know how a man I loved could construct a second reality that was so completely at odds with the one I had lived in with him. The days that followed were unbearable. I started obsessing over small details, how much time he spent at the other house, how he communicated with Laura, how he managed finances, how he could maintain the illusion that he was present in both lives. Every interaction with him felt like walking on a landmine. I had to pretend for my own sanity that we were still married normally, while inside I was plotting, observing, reconstructing everything I knew about him. Then came the hardest part, realizing that some part of me still wanted him, despite the lies, despite the betrayal, despite the children I had never met, despite the life he had hidden. I still loved him. I hated myself for it. I hated that I wanted to reach across the kitchen table and just hug him like nothing had happened, even though I knew I could never do that again. That love was a twisted thing, a remnant of the past, a ghost of the person I thought he was. And it made the betrayal cut even deeper, because the stakes weren't just about logic or morality. They were about a love I couldn't forget, even as it burned me alive. I started planning. Not revenge exactly, though part of me wanted that. No, it was more like preparation, preparing for the inevitable confrontation, for the emotional reckoning that had to come. I began documenting everything. Dates, receipts, patterns. I even made notes about the twins from the little glimpses I had caught. I wanted clarity, control, something tangible I could hold on to in a world that suddenly felt like a house of mirrors, where every reflection was a lie. One night, sitting alone in our bedroom, I realized that nothing would ever feel normal again. The house, our marriage, my life, they had all been infiltrated by this hidden reality. I cried for hours, for the life I thought I had, for the children I would never know on his terms, for the man I had loved and could no longer recognize. I felt lost, shattered, unmoored. And yet, through the grief and the rage, a quiet, terrible clarity settled in. I had to face this head on. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening, because if I didn't confront it, if I didn't demand truth and reckoning, I would be complicit in my own erasure. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if our marriage could survive, or if my heart could. But one thing was certain. I would never see him or our life the same way again. I had glimpsed the other world he had created, and there was no going back. Every memory, every shared moment, every plan for the future was now tainted by the knowledge that he had another home, another family, another version of himself that existed without me.
and I had to live with that truth. The first time I set foot in that house, the one he'd built for them, I felt like I was walking into a parallel universe. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking as I rang the doorbell. Laura answered, and I saw the same flicker of recognition I'd caught in the grocery store, only this time it was mixed with cautious politeness. She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it, only awareness that I was a problem she had to manage. "Hi," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. I tried to sound calm, but it came out brittle. I'm Chris's wife." Her smile faltered, and she stepped aside. "Oh, I see. Come in, I guess." I followed her inside, and the smell hit me immediately. Freshly baked cookies, warm wood, and the faint, unplaceable scent of a home lived in by children. And there they were, the twins. They ran up to him screaming, "Daddy," and threw themselves into his arms. My stomach lurched. I wanted to scream, to leave, to melt into the floor. But I stood there, frozen, while Chris hugged them, ruffling their hair, laughing, completely unaware, or maybe aware, I couldn't tell, of the chaos in my chest. I wanted to ask a million questions, to confront him about every day, every week, every lie. But the words wouldn't come out. I just watched, silently, trying to make sense of this life that had existed parallel to mine for almost a decade. How had he done this? How had he managed to love, to nurture, to raise 2 children, all while pretending to love me in our suburban home? It was impossible, and yet here it was. Chris finally noticed me. His eyes widened, and I saw the moment he realized the confrontation had gone from theory to reality. "You came," he said, voice low. "I had to," I whispered. I needed to see." He nodded, a tiny, guilty tilt of his head. "I should have told you years ago," he admitted. "I should have. I don't even know how to start making it right. I wanted to laugh bitterly, make it right. There was no right to this."
There was no repair for 9 years of hidden weekends, hidden milestones, hidden holidays. There was no undo button. And yet, part of me, the part of me that still loved him, wanted to hear how he justified it, wanted to understand the machinery behind the deceit. Laura came over, quietly, almost as if she were measuring my reactions before committing to anything. "I know this is awkward," she said carefully. "I didn't know about you either, not fully. Chris, he never said." I turned to look at him, incredulous. He never said? He never said, Laura? He is my husband." Chris ran his hands over his face. I know. And I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." The twins, oblivious to the tension, ran around the room, playing with blocks, giggling, shouting. And that was the hardest part. I wanted to reach out and pull them into my arms, to apologize to them for being the stranger who now stood in their reality, for being the person who would inevitably upend their lives just by existing. I wanted to yell at him, to shake him, to make him feel what I felt. But I couldn't. I couldn't disrupt that moment. I couldn't destroy the fragile happiness that he'd somehow maintained for them. We sat down after a while, Chris and I started asking the questions I'd been holding back. How often do you see them? When did this start? How did you manage both lives without anyone noticing? He told me everything, and as he did, I felt my anger and grief morph into something else, something sharper, more precise. I was analyzing, cataloging, preparing. Every detail was ammunition, every admission another piece of the puzzle I could use to understand what kind of man I'd married, and what kind of man he truly was. The more I learned, the more I realized the enormity of the betrayal. Chris hadn't just cheated, he hadn't just lied. He had created an entire parallel existence, a carefully constructed alternate life, complete with its own routines, obligations, and emotions. And I had lived 9 years thinking I was the center of his universe. I hadn't just been lied to, I had been erased, replaced in the hidden corners of his heart with another version of reality I had no access to. There was a moment when I asked about the house, the one that had first tipped me off. He explained that he had bought it shortly after the twins were born. He had used his savings, set up a mortgage under his name, and maintained it quietly, just as he maintained the illusion of normalcy in our home. He'd gone to great lengths to keep everything separate, and for years he'd succeeded. And for years, I had been completely blind, completely trusting, completely unaware. I felt nauseous. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to leave, but something held me there, a mix of horror, curiosity, and a need for closure that I didn't fully understand. As the weeks went on,
I started seeing patterns in his behavior I had never noticed before. The way he checked his phone for messages from Laura, the careful way he divided his time between homes, the meticulous planning that went into maintaining two families simultaneously. It was like watching a magician reveal his secrets, except this magic had ruined my life. Every revelation was a punch to the gut, a reminder that everything I had believed about him, about us, was built on lies. One night I found myself driving back to our house after visiting them. The streets were quiet, streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the wheel, thinking about everything I had seen, everything I had learned. I thought about the twins, about Laura, about the house, about our life. I thought about Chris and the duality of him, the impossibility of reconciling the man I loved with the man who had orchestrated this deception. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything, every visit, every admission, every emotion. It was my lifeline, a way to process the overwhelming tidal wave of betrayal and grief. I wrote about the first time I saw them, about the quiet moments when I realized that part of me still loved him, about the rage that boiled beneath my skin and the sadness that made my chest feel like it would collapse. I wrote about the moral complexity of wanting to protect the children, even as I despised the situation, about the dizzying cognitive dissonance of still needing him while hating him. I began to notice the small cracks in their world too, subtle signs that it wasn't perfect. Laura seemed stressed, constantly negotiating schedules with Chris, juggling the twins' needs, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, while knowing that I existed and that our marriage was another variable in the equation. I realized that while he had hidden the family from me, he hadn't hidden the strain of living this double life from them. They felt it too, in subtle ways I could sense even from a distance. The confrontation I had feared for so long became inevitable. I remember the night vividly. Chris had been at the other house for the evening, and I demanded that he meet me halfway, at a neutral location, a diner we used to go to when we were first dating. I sat in the booth, arms crossed, heart racing, mind spinning with everything I wanted to say. When he arrived, he looked exhausted, older somehow, like the weight of carrying two lives had finally caught up with him. We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat across from each other, the quiet hum of the diner around us, the smell of coffee and fried eggs, the clinking of dishes. I watched him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the man I had loved. And then, finally, I let it all out. I didn't hold back. I told him what I felt: betrayal, anger, confusion, grief, disbelief. I told him what I had seen, what I had learned, how I had traced his steps and found every lie. And he listened, eyes down, silent, accepting every word as truth, every accusation as deserved. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He just sat there, quiet, letting me speak the torrent of emotions I had held back for months. And in that silence, in the way he simply existed there, accepting the weight of his actions, I felt a new emotion rise, something darker, more calculated. It wasn't love anymore, and it wasn't blind hate. It was a mixture of power, control, and understanding. I realized that the next steps would not be easy, that every choice I made from that point on would shape not just my life, but the lives of the children I had glimpsed, the woman I had never expected to encounter, and the man who had orchestrated this double existence. By the end of that night, I knew things would never be the same. I had crossed a threshold, seen the hidden world he had built, and understood the full scope of his betrayal. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to walk away completely, not yet. There was too much to understand, too many threads tangled together, and a part of me still needed answers, needed the story to continue unfolding before I could decide what to do. I think the moment that broke me the most was the first time I spent an entire evening in that house, fully immersed, not just as an intruder, but as a witness to the life Chris had kept secret from me. I told him I wanted to see how they lived, how he acted, how this other family functioned. He hesitated, of course, guilt written all over his face, but he knew I wouldn't be dissuaded.
So I went and I watched. The twins ran around, laughing, chasing each other through the kitchen and living room. Chris was relaxed with them, effortlessly playful in a way that I hadn't realized he could be with us anymore, or maybe never had been. Laura hovered in the background, preparing snacks, smoothing hair, managing chaos with a grace I envied and despised at the same time. And there I was, standing in the hallway, a stranger in someone else's home, watching my husband be a father in a way I had always imagined we would be together. Chris noticed me eventually, and for a split second I thought he might panic. Instead, he walked over slowly, his hand brushing against mine, a subtle reassurance. I couldn't meet his eyes, it was too much. Every gesture, every laugh,
Every tender moment between him and the twins was a reminder that he had built a life that excluded me, that our marriage had been just one compartment of his existence. "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly. I could hear the tension in his voice, the weight of guilt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell, to cry, to collapse into the floor, but I couldn't articulate the chaos inside me. I don't even know what I feel anymore, I admitted. I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm jealous, and I still love you, I think. I don't know. He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging that my emotions were valid, even though I was a stranger in his eyes now. "I never meant for it to be this way," he said. "I never wanted to hurt you." But words didn't matter anymore. Actions did. And his actions had created a life that I couldn't be part of without unraveling everything he had worked to protect. I realized painfully that even if I stayed, even if I pretended, even if I forgave, I would always be living in a shadow. His other life was real, undeniable, and it would always exist parallel to ours. That night, I went home exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. Sleep didn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the twins, about Laura, about Chris, about us. I questioned whether marriage had ever meant anything to him, whether the love I thought we shared was just another compartment in his carefully controlled reality. I felt hollow, as if my heart had been hollowed out by the knowledge of this double life. I started making decisions, small ones at first, keeping records, making plans, observing patterns. But soon they became larger, more deliberate. I realized that I couldn't just watch anymore. I had to act, to assert some control over a life that had been stolen from me without my consent. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, or how I would execute it, but I knew that passivity was no longer an option. Chris noticed the change. He tried to talk to me about it, tried to reason, tried to explain, but I wasn't listening in the same way. I was no longer the trusting wife who believed in his explanations. I was a woman who had been blindsided, who had lived 9 years with a man capable of constructing an entire parallel family without detection, and that required a recalibration of everything: our relationship, my expectations, my understanding of love, trust, and betrayal. The first confrontation with the twins themselves was surreal. I had arranged a short visit under the guise of a playdate, telling Laura that I wanted to bond slowly. The twins didn't know what to make of me. I sat on the couch while they played, watching Chris interact with them, measuring every reaction, every smile, every question. I felt a strange mixture of envy and grief, love and fury. These children were innocent, oblivious to the deception surrounding them, yet they were the living embodiment of everything I had lost. I realized that anger wasn't enough anymore. Rage alone couldn't fix anything. It couldn't repair the trust that had been broken, nor could it erase the existence of a life I would never be part of. I had to think strategically, to navigate this complex web without destroying everyone involved unnecessarily. I had to decide how to exist in a world where the man I loved, and simultaneously despised, had 2 full families, 2 realities, and 2 sets of expectations. As the weeks passed, our interactions became a tense negotiation. We would discuss schedules, boundaries, financial responsibilities, visits. Every word was measured, every conversation a tightrope walk over a chasm of betrayal. I learned to compartmentalize my own emotions, to function in the day-to-day while my inner world was in turmoil. But the emotional weight never lifted. Every laugh, every small interaction, every normalcy I tried to preserve in our home was shadowed by the knowledge of his other life. I started questioning everything about our marriage before the secret. Had he always been capable of this kind of duplicity, or had it been a series of poor decisions compounded over time? Did he ever love me the way he claimed, or was I always just part of a carefully balanced illusion? These questions didn't have answers, and the absence of answers gnawed at me, leaving me restless, sleepless, obsessed with details, patterns, and implications. And yet, even in the midst of grief and anger, there were moments of strange intimacy. Chris would share a memory from before I knew about the twins, a recollection from our early marriage, and for a split second, it felt like him, the man I had loved, was still there. But those moments were fleeting. They were reminders of a past that had been shattered, fragments of a trust that could never be fully restored. I realized that living with this knowledge meant constantly navigating a minefield. Every decision, every interaction, carried the weight of consequences I could not predict. I had to be careful, precise, deliberate. But I also realized something terrifying. Even with all my planning, all my observation, all my reckoning, I could never fully control the situation. Chris had created a world that was larger than us, a world that I had been thrust into unwillingly, and in that world I was only a part, not the center, not the focal point, never the priority. There were nights when I lay awake,
imagining confrontations that had yet to happen, imagining decisions I would have to make, imagining a life that didn't include Chris, or perhaps one that did, but on entirely different terms. I wondered what it meant to forgive, or even consider forgiveness, in a world where deception was built into the foundation of our lives. Could love survive something this monumental? Could I survive? Could we exist together in any meaningful way when one half of the reality I had known had been stolen from me? I began to understand the complexity of human desire, the lengths people will go to protect, hide, and preserve what they value, even when it comes at the expense of the people they claim to love. I saw Chris not just as a husband who betrayed me, but as a man caught in his own labyrinth of mistakes, guilt, and love, incapable of extricating himself without causing further harm. And I saw myself not just as a victim, but as a participant in a life-altering drama that demanded decisions, clarity, and strength I hadn't known I possessed. Finally, I realized that closure wouldn't come from confrontation, from anger, or even from leaving. Closure would come from understanding, from redefining what life, love, and marriage meant in a world forever altered by deceit.
I didn't know if I could fully accept this reality, if I could ever forgive, or if I could ever coexist with a man who had lived a life parallel to mine. But I knew I had to try, if only to reclaim some measure of control over my own existence, to navigate a world that had been reshaped without my consent, and to decide ultimately whether I could remain or whether walking away was the only way to survive. I stayed that night in our house, alone, thinking about the twins, about Laura, about Chris, about everything. I realized that life was no longer simple, no longer predictable, no longer safe. But I also realized that the story wasn't over. It was still unfolding, and I had to see it through. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. For the first time, I understood that survival wasn't about ignoring betrayal. It wasn't about pretending it didn't happen. Survival was about navigating the impossible, facing the truth in its rawest form, and finding a way to live with it, even if the cost was the love I thought I knew, the marriage I thought I had, and the life I thought was mine alone. And in that moment, as I sat alone in our living room, listening to the quiet hum of the night, I realized that the hardest part wasn't discovering the secret. The hardest part was learning how to live with it, how to carry it forward, and how to face the man I had loved with both my heart and my fury, knowing that everything had changed forever.